After the car accident, I suffered a head injury, and the doctor said I might suffer from amnesia. Hearing this, I instinctively made a joke and asked my girlfriend who was sitting next to my bed, "Who are you?" She was silent for a moment. Her expression was a little distant, and then she replied softly, "We are just ordinary friends." This made me stunned for a moment. Jessica sat in front of my bed, her eyes cold and her tone without any joking. Her words, "ordinary friends," made my chest sink, and I almost swallowed my words back. I think if the doctor hadn't reminded her to come over, she might not be here at all. I didn't intend to question her, but just smiled slightly, but I felt inexplicably bitter in my heart. "Oh, so that's the case. Thank you for your help." As soon as I finished speaking, she just hummed lightly, then lowered her head to check the screen of her mobile phone, and said expressionlessly, "Since you are awake, I will leave first. I have something to do at work." After she finished speaking, she stood up without hesitation, walked to the door of the ward, and opened it, as if her words of "have a good rest" were purely out of politeness. I looked at her back, with a smile on my face, and only slowly withdrew it until she completely disappeared outside the door. At that moment, my mood completely fell to the bottom. No one knew that Jessica and I were campus sweethearts. After graduating from college, we joined a top company in Shanghai together as market planners. We were still young at the time and knew that office romances were inappropriate, so we never mentioned our relationship to outsiders. For years after graduation, we were both promoted to department managers, leading different teams. At that time, we could not make our relationship public and could only continue to keep our relationship low-key. Sometimes I would ask Jessica if she had ever thought about making our relationship public. After all, the company did not explicitly prohibit employees from dating. But every time she answered perfunctorily, it seemed that she had never seriously considered this issue. Gradually, I began to doubt whether we were still a couple. It wasn't until today that I finally understood the truth. The doctor told Jessica that I might have temporary amnesia, but I would recover soon. In such a confusing situation, she could actually tell me coldly that we were just ordinary friends. She should not be worried at all that I would remember our past, and she didn't even seem to care whether I really had amnesia or not. Maybe she didn't want to continue with me a long time ago. After all, if she really wanted to break up, how could she pursue Ryan so confidently? I have always had a feeling that a man's sixth sense is sometimes sharper than radar. Looking back on this period of time, my relationship with Jessica has long been dull. We have been together for 7 years, and time has made us familiar with each other like the lines on our palms. Any subtle changes are difficult to hide from each other. I began to notice some unusual details. The most obvious one was Ryan, a new intern in Jessica's department. This boy was tall and handsome, exuding a youthful vibe, with a simple name, Lee. The HR in charge of the employee's entry file once talked to me about Ryan and mentioned that his father was Gordon, the boss of our company. He sounded like a typical rich second-generation tall, rich and handsome guy. At first, Jessica explained to me that she took care of Ryan because she didn't want to offend the company's boss, and Ryan was a childish young boy, not her ideal type. I believed her explanation, but I still felt weird. Until one day, I accidentally logged into Jessica's music account that I hadn't used for a long time. This account was often used by us in college. She created a playlist for me. The playlist contained many songs that reminded her of me, including my favorite singers and even the songs I shared on WeChat moments. We often listened to music together and had a lot of good times. However, when I logged in that day, I found that she had deleted my exclusive playlist. What shocked me even more was that the recent listening history was full of Korean pop songs that Ryan liked, and these songs she would never listen to before. Although I was full of doubts, I did not question her immediately. I knew that I could not accuse her unless there was solid evidence. I never lose my temper easily, like a seasoned player sitting at the poker table, always keeping calm and silent. However, the understanding between Ryan and Jessica seems to be much more than that. In early February, Jessica took on an important project with her project team, while I was working on another project with my team in another city. Occasionally, I heard that the contact person for her project was a difficult British man. I was so busy that I didn't even have time to eat, so I called her to ask about the progress of the project. But she didn't answer, probably because she was busy. I thought about it and sent her a WeChat message. As a result, she never replied to me. A few days later, I saw her post a group photo on WeChat Moments. Ryan stood next to her, smiling brightly and making a scissors sign. The smile seemed to be so bright that it was a bit dazzling, especially the position next to her, as if it hinted at something self-evident. The project seemed to be going smoothly. Her WeChat Moments copy read, "Know yourself and know your enemy." I couldn't help but think that Ryan also posted a similar WeChat Moments copy, with the copy, "Fight 100 battles and never be in danger." I clicked on Ryan's Moments and found that his and Jessica's WeChat signatures had also become these two texts, like a tacit response, like some kind of hint between them in this project. Jessica once said that her WeChat signature was about my name. But I don't know if she thought of me when she changed her signature, or at least when she deleted those things related to my memory. Did she think that I was once a part of her? Of course, she never returned my calls or my WeChat messages, but she left a message on Ryan's Moments. "Eat quickly. Be careful with your stomach." At that moment, I touched my aching stomach, feeling both disappointed and deeply painful. I turned off my phone and took a deep breath. This was the second time I had to endure her indifference. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days, and the doctor finally said I could be discharged. To be honest, I didn't receive any news from Jessica in the past few days. The only thing that made me feel that she still cared about me was the bouquet of flowers she sent me. Holding the cappuccino, I stood in the corridor and suddenly felt that maybe I should give Jessica a chance to see if she still cared about our relationship. I called and waited for a long time before the call was connected. It was Jessica's familiar voice on the other end of the phone, calm and without fluctuation. "William, are you discharged from the hospital?" I asked her. "Do you have time to pick me up?" We both tacitly did not mention the phrase ordinary friends or the amnesia, as if none of that had ever happened. Was silence on the other end of the phone for a while, and finally she said, "I'm sorry, William, I'm busy and can't leave. I'll call you a car." I could tell that her tone was a little perfunctory, not as caring as before. I couldn't help but feel disappointed, and I asked calmly, "What are you busy with?" There was silence on the other end of the phone for a moment, as if he was considering how to answer, but in the end, he didn't give me a positive response. I sighed and hung up the phone. My heart ached, thinking that just now we were dependent on and supported each other. But now everything has become so strange. I remember one time when I just graduated, I suddenly had a gastroenteritis attack late at night, and the pain was so severe that I almost fainted. I called Jessica, and I was almost unconscious at that time. When I woke up, I found her sitting in front of my bed. Her eyes were red and swollen, and her expression was nervous. In order to rush to the hospital, she actually wore one slipper and one sneaker the wrong way. Her eyes were full of fear. She held my hand tightly and said, "Next time if you do this again, remember to call 120 first. What will you do if I don't answer the call?" At that time, I looked at her with a smile, my heart full of dependence and trust. Yes, she once cared about me so much. However, the warmth I once had has now become blurred. I shook my head and threw the cappuccino in my hand into the trash can next to me. Just like that, I began to tell myself that I no longer need these memories of the past. Just as I was caught up in these complicated emotions, a strange man came over, pointed at the flowers in the trash can, and apologized slightly. "I'm sorry, the driver accidentally hit you yesterday. I took you to the hospital and contacted your emergency contact. Because of something, I had to leave first. This is your discharge gift." He looked very sincere and gentle. It turned out that the bouquet of flowers was not sent by Jessica. I was a little stunned and apologized with a smile. "Sorry, I thought it was a gift from someone else." I sighed secretly in my heart, feeling that I was completely trapped in this confusion with no way out. When I got home from the hospital, Jessica was already at home. I pushed the door open and walked in and saw her sitting on the sofa. A variety show was playing on the TV screen, and she lowered her head as if she was chatting with someone with a smile on her lips. The dim light of the mobile phone screen reflected on her face, revealing a gentle atmosphere. I couldn't help but be stunned. How long has it been since I saw such a gentle smile on her face? I stood by the door, and she didn't seem to notice the sound of me coming in. It was not until I gently called out, "Jessica," that she raised her head, and the smile on her face disappeared instantly, replaced by an indescribable surprise. She subconsciously locked her phone, put her hand on the sofa, looked at me, and asked, "Are you discharged from the hospital?" I couldn't help but laugh, laughing at myself and her, and a bitter feeling rose in my heart. I walked up to her and looked at the phone in her hand. Suddenly, I felt that the distance between us had become too far. I looked at her gently and said calmly, "Let's talk." Jessica and I broke up peacefully. We were both very calm people. There was no complicated emotional entanglement or fierce quarrel in the breakup process. The whole process was very short and direct, as if both of us understood that the matter had come to an end without any procrastination. Everyone has matured and no longer needs fancy words or complicated explanations. Things are so clear. In fact, there is nothing to talk about. It is tacitly understood that there is nothing that can be saved. When I said, "Let's break up," Jessica didn't ask me why, nor did she show any emotion. She just stood there in silence for a long time without any reaction. I think, at that moment, she might have felt relieved and finally freed. It was a result she had been waiting for a long time, although she would not admit it. After a long while, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't accept her apology and remained calm. I started to arrange the next things, with a calm tone and no sadness on my face. My calmness surprised her. When I suggested that she move out as soon as possible, she suddenly interrupted me, frowned slightly, and looked at me steadily. "William, you don't seem to be sad at all." I looked up at her, without any emotion in my heart. I didn't tell her that I had thought about everything between us countless times in the middle of the night. When she didn't reply to my WeChat, but left a message under Moments. When she deleted the playlist she created for me, just to listen to those Korean pop songs that she would not have been interested in with Ryan. When she coldly said to me, who was pretending to have amnesia, that we were ordinary friends. When she and Ryan enjoyed the ambiguous atmosphere between adults in a place where I couldn't see. I had already been hurt and sad. I have never shown too much emotion to her, because she's like a benign tumor in my body. Although the tumor is not fatal, it slowly erodes health and vitality. There is nothing to be afraid of, as long as it is removed as soon as possible before it gets worse. The pain is only temporary, and I will live healthily afterwards. Before Jessica packed up and left, I calmly asked her one last question. "Jessica, did you change your mind because Ryan is Gordon's son? Or just because he is him?" She stood at the entrance and looked back at me with an elusive emotion in her eyes. At that moment, I seemed to be myself when I first met her. I vaguely remembered her standing on the playground in college, blushing and confessing to me awkwardly. However, the Jessica in front of me is no longer the ignorant teenager, but an adult who is well versed in power and swims in the ocean of interests. She was silent for a moment, then replied calmly, "William, people always want to go higher." Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh, and my heart was filled with mixed emotions. However, I still admired her honesty. At least she didn't pretend that nothing had happened. I looked at her and smiled sincerely and said calmly, "Jessica, then I wish you to fly high and get what you want." She looked at me with a hint of regret in her eyes, but the weight of regret seemed insignificant compared to her inner ambition. Finally, she sighed, "William, don't hate me." I didn't respond to her, but just watched her leave silently. The downside of an office romance is that you still have to work face-to-face with your partner after the breakup. The awkwardness and silence after the breakup have become an inescapable reality between us. When I went out that day, I saw Jessica and Ryan standing downstairs of the company. They were not the only two of them. There were other team members around them. It was lunchtime, and everyone was preparing to go out for lunch. Ryan looked very lively, with a hearty smile on his face, and was talking about something. Jessica looked down at him, with a faint smile on her lips and a gentle look. Occasionally, she would notice that he was walking too fast behind her and gently pull his arm to avoid obstacles. At that moment, I found that she looked very happy. I had never seen her like this when I was with her. I sat in the car and watched their backs disappear from my sight until they entered a nearby Hong Kong-style tea restaurant. I looked away. The driver saw that I seemed to be in a bad mood and couldn't help asking in a gossipy tone, "Are you secretly in love with that beautiful girl?" I chuckled and explained, "That's my ex-girlfriend." The driver's eyes instantly changed from curiosity to embarrassment. He hesitated and finally said carefully, "Oh, sorry, did I disturb you?" I took over the conversation considerately. "It's okay." After entering the company, I just sat down and saw Bella walking towards me with joy in her eyes. "Brother William, you were discharged from the hospital." "Really? Why didn't you let us go to see you?" she said as she approached. I smiled and waved my hand. "It's nothing serious. Look at me now, I'm fine, right? By the way, how is the review of the Hong Kong case going?" Bella followed me back to my office with a stack of printed materials. After handing me the documents, she looked around to make sure no one was around, then came over and whispered, "Brother William, don't look at the data yet. I have something to tell you." I looked up at her, and she looked a little angry, and it was obvious that she had something difficult to say. "You know, Albert will be in charge of the Nanjing branch next month." She hesitated and whispered, "Everyone is saying that the vacant director position will probably be between you and Jessica. The performance of the two of you in the past few years is comparable. Everyone thinks that it will be decided based on your strength. In the end, everyone will be convinced of who will take the position." I smiled slightly and said gently, "It's okay, it's just the two of us. Just tell me directly." She paused, her eyes flashing with complex emotions. "But, Brother William, I saw Jessica hugging Ryan from her department in the tea room a few days ago. Ryan is the son of the boss, Gordon, and this news is not a secret in the company." Bella said this suddenly, obviously wanting me to pay attention to something. I couldn't help but smile slightly and sneered in my heart. It turned out that when I was lying in the hospital, holding my mobile phone and wondering where Jessica was and what she was doing, she was secretly having a sneaky relationship with the rich second generation. However, all the emotions in my heart had already dissipated at this moment. Facing all this, I just felt that I had expected it. "Come on, it's okay. After all, the personnel transfer is arranged by the superiors." I responded calmly, "Just let it go." Taking a deep breath, I lowered my head and continued to read the information. At this moment, I no longer care about these things, and there is only an inexplicable relief in my heart. Just as I was busy sorting out documents, Jessica suddenly knocked on the glass door of my office, breaking this brief peace. I looked up and saw her standing at the door, looking at me calmly with deep eyes. I was a little surprised. Although our breakup was relatively peaceful, it does not mean that we can talk casually like ordinary colleagues. For me, there is no room for discussion in our relationship. Jessica stood at the door, walked into my office gently, and paused before speaking. "William, I thought you would resign." Her tone was like persuasion, but also like advice. "We have been together for 7 years. Don't say I'm heartless and cruel. Albert is going to Nanjing next month, and one of us will be promoted, and the position of director may be vacant." She paused, and a hint of imperceptible confidence flashed in her eyes. "If I were you, I would make plans early and find a way out for myself." I looked at her and understood immediately. She had obviously considered the position of director as hers. In order to prevent my relationship with her from becoming an obstacle to her promotion, she tried to force me to leave in advance. All this was for her own benefit and to avoid gossip from the outside world. She didn't seem to realize that in my eyes, her advice had completely exposed her hypocrisy and selfishness. I didn't care why she did that, because I was used to women's fickleness and change of heart. Feelings are not worth delving into, especially when her betrayal was so direct. I could accept that she was ruthless to me, but I didn't expect that she would not even leave me the last bit of humanity. I looked at her as if I was looking at a stranger and calmly said to her, "Jessica, you are such a piece of trash." She didn't respond, just stood there in silence, as if she was overwhelmed by my words. I suddenly felt that everything I had done was really not worth mentioning. The relationship between her and me no longer had any meaning. A week later, Jessica, who had broken up with me, finally got together with Ryan in a high-profile manner. They no longer concealed their affection and updated their moments every day, with countless colleagues in the company liking and blessing them. After seeing this, a mutual friend of Jessica in college, sent me private messages on WeChat and asked me what happened. I didn't reply to any of them. Ryan appeared in front of me. Was an ordinary afternoon. The office staff either went out to eat or rested at their workstations. I was grinding coffee beans in the tea room with a cup in my hand, and the mellow smell gradually spread. Suddenly, he stood behind me. I turned around and made way for him, but he didn't go over. He stood in front of me, his eyes full of meaningful scrutiny. "William, I know you talked to Jessica. Jessica is so sweet, with a baby face, really cute." I lowered my head and looked at him calmly, my brows slightly raised with a puzzled look. He stared at me, his eyes moving slowly across my face. It seemed that he didn't get the reaction he wanted, and disappointment flashed across his eyes. He then said, "I saw our playlist named after you." There was a hint of contempt in his words. "Your secret relationship was really bad." I didn't interrupt him and waited patiently for him to finish. After he finished speaking, I whispered. He then said, "My father likes Jessica very much. You know, she's not only mature and stable, but also has ideas and drive. Dad said that she is very similar to himself when he was young, and he wants to cultivate her." When he said this, there was a little pride on his face. Jessica's future is limitless. It happens that I like her very much, and she likes me too. Now we are together. After listening to him, I understood his intention. First he demonstrated, then he threatened me, and finally he persuaded me to resign and make room for him. "But William, your presence is quite annoying." There was a hint of coldness in his eyes. "I hope you can be more sensible and resign." I smiled, but an inexplicable anger rose in my heart. This Ryan really thought he had the power to manipulate others at will. I looked down at him and responded calmly. "Mr. Lee, any personnel change of employees must go through the process. You came to me today to say these words. I wonder if you want to fire me or something else." Ryan's face changed slightly. Obviously, he didn't expect me to be so direct. "If you want to fire me, please let HR come and talk to me." I smiled slightly. After all, the company has a clear rule that personnel changes for managers and above must be approved and reported to the chairman in person. Ryan's face turned pale in an instant, as if he had never expected that I would fight back like this. I continued, "As for you, an intern in Jessica's department, don't stretch your hands too far." After saying that, I was too lazy to look at his expression, holding the cup, and turn away. A few days later, Albert's Nanjing appointment and transfer notice finally came out. In order to bid him farewell, the chairman specially prepared a farewell banquet and invited all the company's management. The atmosphere at the banquet was very formal. Everyone knew that in addition to bidding farewell to Albert, personnel changes in the most core departments would also follow. When the HR manager put the invitation letter on my desk, Bella seemed a little nervous. She encouraged me in a low voice. "Brother William, come on. No matter what, our team is on your side. If you can't make it here, we will follow you to go somewhere else." I smiled, picked up the invitation, and tapped his forehead gently. "Don't worry, it's no big deal. It's just a meal. Have you forgotten what my life motto is? Build a bridge over the water and cut a path through the mountains. There's nothing to be afraid of. I'm definitely not the one who loses." When the day of the banquet arrived, I remained calm. In the box, the heads of the marketing department, management department, human resources department, finance department, and various business lines gathered together. Chairman Gordon sat in the main seat, Ryan sat on his left, and Jessica sat next to Ryan. Everyone saw Ryan. They exchanged glances. Before, the rumors that Ryan was the son of the boss Gordon were just gossip, but today, Ryan, the intern, sat next to the chairman, which completely turned all the rumors into facts. No one took the initiative to ask anything, as if they had already understood it tacitly. I sat next to the manager of the finance department, following proper etiquette, and eating and drinking. The atmosphere gradually became relaxed after 3 rounds of drinks, and everyone started to chat. I only occasionally interjected a few words, maintaining my usual calmness and restraint. No one mentioned complicated matters, only low laughter and relaxed conversation. The protagonist of the banquet was Albert. In addition to reviewing his contributions to the company, we also wished him a successful start in Nanjing branch. The topic transitioned from the relaxed one at the beginning to a formal one. Gordon put down his chopsticks and looked around at everyone present. His expression was calm. Although he was over 50 years old, he was well maintained and still had an extraordinary demeanor. He wiped the corners of his mouth gently and said slowly, "In addition to bidding farewell to Albert, we have one more thing to say." He paused, looked at me, and the topic became more serious. Everyone knows that I have a son. Although he doesn't want people in the company to know his identity, he started from the bottom and worked hard step by step. Now, he is doing very well. He glanced around and smiled more and more. The time is ripe. Albert happens to be going to Nanjing. I think it's time to introduce him to everyone. His eyes fell on me quietly, with a hint of pride in his smile. "William, come here. This is my son. Everyone should know him." I was slightly stunned when I heard this. Then a faint smile appeared on my face. I stood up and walked towards him in silence. As I stood up, suddenly, the water cup next to Jessica was knocked over, and the sound of glass collision broke the original silence. She reacted quickly, said sorry with a smile, and wiped the table with a tissue. Her movements were calm and smooth, not at all embarrassed. When her eyes flashed by, I couldn't help but squint slightly and saw that her face was a little pale. But I didn't look at her again, but continued to walk to Ryan and whispered, "Mr. Lee, please make way." There was a low gasp from the surroundings, and I knew that tonight's banquet had finally achieved its purpose. Soon, everyone began to leave. I can imagine that this incident will definitely cause an uproar in the company, especially for Jessica. I'm more curious about her current mood. When the show was over, I didn't even bother to look at Jessica. When Ryan and her came to greet my father in a daze, he said in a restrained tone, "Mr. Lee, Mr. Fong, we're leaving first." I didn't respond, but just watched coldly, but there was no fluctuation in my heart. My father, Gordon, didn't react immediately. His eyes fell on Jessica's face and looked at Ryan. After a moment, he forced a smile and motioned everyone to stay in the box. When most people in the box had left, his smile gradually faded, with a slightly inquiring look on his face, and finally turned his eyes to me. "William, what is your relationship with Jessica?" I clearly remember that I mentioned Jessica when I just graduated, but I didn't tell him that we were dating. His unfathomable eyes seemed to have understood. I looked at Gordon coldly and met his scrutinizing gaze with a slight smile on my lips. I said lightly, "Didn't you see it? Ryan stole it. His mother is good at interfering in other people's relationships, and Ryan is naturally the same." I changed the subject, and my tone became heavier. "Dad, the last time I called you Gordon Dad was when I was 7 years old. At that time, you had just divorced my mother. Remember that day? I pulled your sleeve and asked you why your mother wanted to divorce you. Why didn't you say anything?" I paused and continued slowly. "You didn't say anything. I didn't understand it at that time. It was not until later that I realized that there are such complicated grievances and hatreds between adults. You and Ryan, his mother, were childhood sweethearts, but she despised you for being poor. After she got married, she took Ryan and left you. Later, you married my mother, and my mother accompanied you to start from scratch and gradually accumulated wealth. Ryan's mother despised the poor and loved the rich back then, and now she comes to you again with Ryan. I believe you know how unwilling you are." Dad frowned, as if recalling the past. I added softly, "The more you hold a grudge, the harder it is to forget those old things. But my mother never said much about this. She always maintained your dignity in front of me. You are a decent person. After being betrayed, you divorced neatly. But I always knew that you and Ryan's mother did not remarry. You were still single, but Ryan was accepted by you." I sneered. "He was originally named Wong to please you. In order to get your approval, he changed his name. As for Ryan, he is not a stranger to me. I know more than he thinks. I knew these things as early as when I was 8 years old. At that time, I secretly returned to the villa without telling my mother and saw Gordon celebrating Ryan's birthday. At that time, Ryan was only 10 years old, and Gordon held her in his arms with a smile on his face. Ryan's mother stood aside, and the three of them seemed to be happy, as if all this was a family scene that should be taken for granted. From that moment on, I never called Gordon Dad again, and even from then on, I rarely saw him. Jessica only knew that my parents were divorced and that I changed my name to William after my mother's. After graduation, Gordon asked me to work in his company. He said bluntly, "In these years, I have no children but you. Doesn't your mother understand? You're my biological child. Who else can I give the empire that your mother and I have built, if not you?" When he said these words, his tone revealed an authority that could not be refuted. My mother is a proud and aloof woman. After she divorced Gordon, she didn't take anything except what she deserved. Unlike her, I was unwilling to give up. I felt that what belonged to me, why should I give it to others? The more something made others unhappy, the more I was willing to do it. So, together with Jessica, we started working from the bottom of the company's core business department after graduation. Gordon knew Jessica, so he paid more attention to her and praised her for being young and promising with a bright future. In fact, these compliments were just because I mentioned her in front of Gordon. Although I knew that the family relationship was complicated, I originally planned to explain everything to Jessica on the day when Gordon revealed his identity. Unexpectedly, she gave me a surprise. Gordon looked at me that day, and for the first time, he showed a tired look on his face. "Dad is sorry for you." His tone revealed a kind of guilt that was hard to conceal. I chuckled and said calmly, "It's just a man's nature." But I couldn't help but think of what Ryan said when he came to me in the tea room to protest. Gordon said Jessica looks a lot like him when he was young. I think they're really alike, especially in terms of being heartless and ruthless. They have no vision. It was 3 days later when I returned to the company. 3 days was enough time for everyone to digest the shock of this period. When I returned, everyone's expressions were still calm. No one came around to ask questions, but their smiles were more enthusiastic than usual. After all, these workplace elites can grasp the right degree. This change made me breathe a sigh of relief, and there was no longer any ripples in my heart. Only Bella was a little dissatisfied with me, complaining that I didn't tell her the truth in advance. As a result, she worried about me for so long, but in the end, I was playing the pig and eating the tiger. In the end, I coaxed her with a seafood dinner. She opened the lobster claws and asked me, "Are you really a rich young man? What's the situation with Ryan?" Explained the whole thing to her. Bella's face changed, and she said in astonishment, "Oh my God, there are such shameless people who dare to cheat under the name of the big boss's son. It's disgusting." She patted my shoulder and said, "Brother William, many people secretly gossiped with me during the few days you were away. Can you tell them the truth?" I peeled the lobster silently and said with a smile, "It's not a secret. Just tell them when they ask." I didn't underestimate Bella's fighting ability. In one afternoon, almost everyone in the company knew Ryan's background. The speed at which the news spread was beyond my expectation. One day, when I went to the finance department to review the project budget, I saw Ryan standing in front of Catherine's desk. Catherine frowned and pointed at the expense report and said, "Why did you use the company's account to reimburse the bag you bought? This will not be approved." Her voice was calm and unquestionable. "You should also check the other expense items carefully and verify them clearly. Don't use the company's account to reimburse personal belongings." Ryan's face immediately turned ugly. He picked up the expense report and glared at me as he was about to leave. His eyes seemed to be accusing me, but I ignored him. I secretly sighed in my heart that this was what he deserved. Since Gordon made my identity public, I started to get in touch with the company's various business lines and gradually understood the company's macro development. Jessica has not been promoted to director yet, and Albert is still in charge in Nanjing. My manager position was vacant, and after a period of investigation, it was decided to recruit a business manager from another large company to replace my original position. After the company's personnel changes were confirmed, my colleagues who knew me well sent me WeChat or text messages to congratulate me, with only two exceptions. Jessica and Ryan seemed to avoid me on purpose and even avoided seeing me since I returned to the company. In fact, I didn't need to do that. My energy was limited, and the complicated company affairs kept me busy every day. I had no time to pay attention to their dynamics. What's more, the bridge is the bridge, the road is the road. After all, we are no longer on the same road. But they obviously don't think so. Ryan was the first to cause trouble for me. That day, we were in the empty tea room again, and the air was filled with the familiar aroma of coffee beans. Ryan stood behind me. His eyes changed from the previous arrogance to anger. "Hypocrisy," he said coldly. I ignored him and stood there calmly, listening to him continue. "At first, your mother pretended not to care about anything. She left and said she would never contact you again. I thought you were really not interested in the family's assets, but I didn't expect you to be the most hypocritical now." When he said this, his expression was distorted. "You pretended to be pure and indifferent, but in private you were fighting for these things and finally came back." I suddenly laughed. I laughed happily. In fact, I don't want to waste time with stupid people, especially Ryan. Bella once asked me, "How are you going to mess with Ryan?" At that time, I smiled and answered, "Mess with him? I don't plan to mess with him at all. As long as he is in the company, there will always be someone who embarrasses him. Ryan is just a clown, not worth mentioning." I thought to myself, but I remained calm on the surface and looked at Ryan. In my eyes, he was just a fool who kept humiliating himself. "Ryan," I said calmly, "don't say such nonsense in the future. You are so excited. It's as if I cut a piece of flesh from you." I looked at his gnashing teeth and laughed in my heart. "If it were you, you should go home and persuade your mother. Think of some new ways to please the old man. It's really pitiful that you and your son have tried so hard to please him for so many years, but in the end, all you got was that meager living expenses and you didn't even get a decent house." I paused and continued coldly. "Don't worry. The management of the company will be handed over to me. Ryan, you and your mother will not stop having that little living allowance. It is the hard-earned money for you to try your best to make the old man happy in the past few years." Ryan's face turned pale instantly, almost changing drastically from red to white. His eyes were filled with suppressed anger, but he still couldn't hide the obvious sense of loss. I looked at him and my smile deepened. "You two, mother and son, are really pitiful." His lips moved slightly, as if he was going to say something, but in the end he just said coldly, "You win." I sneered disdainfully. "Garbage should stay in the trash can. Ryan, you asked for it." I really think that he and Jessica are really a good match. They tacitly used each other in the company and climbed up to power together, but in the end it was all in vain, wasting their efforts and getting no substantial rewards. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but laugh, and I really thought these two people were a little ridiculous. However, I had watched this scene for almost too long. I started to feel annoyed, so I looked at Ryan patiently and gently. "This is the last time I'll be nice to you. I hope you will know better and behave yourself in the company. Otherwise, I won't be so nice next time." Ryan seemed to want to say something, but I interrupted him coldly. "It's not worth wasting time on you." He stood there. The anger on his face turned into helplessness. I smiled at him, enjoying his lost look. At this time, my heart was full of irony. Ryan's anger was not worth mentioning, and I, from beginning to end, did not regard him as an opponent. He wanted to challenge me, which really underestimated me. Jessica's resignation was within my expectations. She did not give any complicated reasons, and all the resignation procedures were normal, and everything was carried out according to procedures. Only after she completed all the procedures did she send me a message asking if we could talk. I don't know what we have to talk about. After all, after the company made my identity public, the distance between us had already been too far. That night, she called and said she would wait for me downstairs at my house. I happened to live in a mansion at that time. My father asked me to go back for a few days to deal with some affairs. He said he would help me sort out some interpersonal relationships in the company. I didn't reply to her, nor did I go home, and I didn't even answer her calls. In the end, she wisely stopped bothering me. However, this time, I did not avoid her. Perhaps because this was the last farewell, she still showed up at my door even though I did not reply to her message. At that moment, I was impressed that Jessica always maintained a certain calm temperament. It seemed that in her eyes, everything between us was like the past, which could be easily forgotten. Standing at my door, she smiled and asked, "Can we chat?" I no longer refused her and let her in. We stood side by side in front of the huge French window. The tall buildings outside the window were brightly lit, as if we were in the Milky Way. I could feel her slight sigh, echoing softly in the quiet room. Remember when we first came to work? That was almost 5 years ago. Jessica murmured to herself, with some memories in her eyes. We had just graduated, and you and I were standing on such a high floor, overlooking the lights of the city. When I first joined the company, I was ambitious and wanted to make a big splash, but I was assigned to do the most insignificant chores. She smiled bitterly. I didn't interrupt her, but listened quietly, feeling a little complicated. At that time, she won $1 million order with her own efforts. At that time, she covered her mouth and drank until her face turned pale, but she still looked at me excitedly and said, "William, let's build a home in this city together." She smiled, with a hint of melancholy in her eyes. However, this big order eventually became her boss's achievement, and she only got a bonus of 500 yuan. She treated me to a hot pot meal, and I sat opposite her. In the steaming hot pot, I couldn't see the expression on her face, but only remembered her voice. That was the first and last time I saw the puzzled confusion on her face. I lowered my head and was silent for a moment. Memories of Jessica flooded into my mind like a tide, and I couldn't help but feel a little bitter. She asked me, "If we continue like this, when will we be able to make it in life?" Jessica's voice became softer, as if she was reminiscing about that time in the past. After that meal, I went to find Gordon. Ever since he divorced my mom hasn't seen him again, let alone his resources. Even though he gave me a bank card with no limit, my mom and I never used it. I took a deep breath and recalled that time, and I couldn't help feeling a little bitter in my heart. That was the first time I asked Gordon for help, and I did it for Jessica. Gordon's reaction surprised me. His expression was full of relief, and the words he said, "William, if she can't even handle this, she doesn't deserve to be the daughter-in-law of my Lee family," are still fresh in my memory. I couldn't help but sneer. I had heard Gordon's words countless times. Jessica was indeed smart and capable, but I knew she never realized that the distance between us was already unbridgeable. From that time on, Jessica's career really started to take off. I whispered, "And you started to go further and further down this political path. I don't know when we started to drift apart." Jessica's eyes became complicated, as if she was looking for my emotional response, but I didn't give her a chance. My tone became even colder. "What you said are all things in the past. Are you talking to me about these things now? Do you want me to find back your past regrets for you?" "But, Jessica, there is nothing to talk about between us a long time ago. How do we become like this?" she asked me with a hint of nostalgia in her tone. I sneered and responded coldly, "Don't play the emotional card with me. I understand your original behavior of a good bird chooses a tree to roost in, but now, don't let me look down on you again." Jessica didn't seem to expect me to be so straightforward. She tilted her head and looked at me intently without saying anything more. Her smile gradually faded, her brows slightly furrowed, and she finally asked, "Is it impossible to be just ordinary friends?" "William, I betrayed you, and you concealed things from me. Are we even now?" I took a deep breath, looked at her expression without any ripples, and said softly, "What you call even is based on my identity as Gordon's son. Have you really never thought about it? If I were not Gordon's son, what would happen today?" I continued, my tone getting colder and colder. "I watched you and Ryan doing dirty things behind your back, doing your secret collusion, and I chose to resign under your pressure. According to the non-compete agreement, I can't even work in the same industry anymore. All the hard work and efforts I have made over the years have become a stepping stone for your relationship with Ryan. You and Ryan will probably be living in a high-rise building in the city center, enjoying your wonderful life, while I am wandering the streets, lost and heartbroken. I looked at her pale face and couldn't help but sneer. Jessica, tell me now, are we even? She lowered her head, her face becoming paler. I smiled coldly, with almost no emotion. How do you think we can make it even? You own me, and you will own me for the rest of your life. I'm not prepared to forgive you generously. From now on, dust to dust, we will be nothing more than strangers. I didn't waste any more time talking to her. I looked at the time and said politely, "You should go." Jessica's back was a little staggering, with a look of weakness and embarrassment in her eyes. Over the years, I have rarely seen her like this, but this path was chosen by her. Her at an industry summit. By then, I had taken over Gordon's position and was always the center of attention wherever I went. She stood outside the crowd, with a complicated look in her eyes, and a hint of helplessness flashed through them. The distance between us was no longer possible to cross. Later, when he was having dinner with Gordon, he mentioned Ryan's feelings, saying that he was cheated of money and sex and had no brains. I don't know when Jessica and Ryan broke up, but it's not surprising that people get together for profit and separate for profit. I picked up the teacup and looked out the window at the blooming garden, feeling very calm. The spring breeze was caressing the flowers, and it was already late April. The past had drifted away with the wind, and everything in the past had long become a distant memory. Jessica, you were once just a passerby in the end. I whispered to myself, with the corners of my mouth slightly raised. Yes, the past has passed like the wind, and no one can change it. I will no longer stop for anyone, nor will I look back at anyone. In life, the most valuable thing is the path you take, not the direction you lost for someone. The boat has passed through thousands of mountains, and the past has long gone with the wind. I took a sip of tea with a determined light in my eyes. At this new high point, I have stood high enough and no longer bow down to anyone.